President Lee Jae-myung addressed South Korea's vision for energy and expanded his summit diplomacy at this year's G7 summit in Canada. Included in a total of 9 summits he held was one with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, and just in time for the two countries' 60th anniversary of normalizing relations. Despite an unconditional surrender demanded by U.S. President Donald Trump, Israeli explosions hammered the Iranian capital Tehran, entering the 6th day of the conflict. North Korea is sending at least 6,000 construction workers to help rebuild Russia's Kursk region in their latest military collaboration. South Korea called the move concerning and said it doesn't support the action. The Group of 7 summit in Canada has come to an end, with energy security and AI topping this year's discussions. There, President Lee Jae-myung also shared his country's vision and contribution and officially put South Korea's summit diplomacy back on track. Our top office correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
It was all smiles with a warm welcome in Kananaskis, Canada, as the Group of 7 began its expanded session with an official welcome and a group photo, with the notable absence of U.S. President Donald Trump. Invited were several guest countries, including South Korea, Australia, and India, for some crucial discussions.
For common problems in energy security, common opportunities in new technologies from information technologies, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, the need to have reliable supplies that this table can produce.
The new South Korean leader Lee Jae-myung took the opportunity on his debut on the global stage for multilateral summit diplomacy. His focus was on Korea's vision for diversifying energy, aiming to expand renewable energy and upgrade the country's power supply system at a time when there is more power demand due to the use of AI. Also addressed war security and critical minerals within the international framework and forging a global AI ecosystem, stressing Korea's role and contribution along the way.
Amid a major shift in global economic security, we have made clear our vision and role by actively taking part in discussing pending global issues. We have consolidated the status of the Republic of Korea as a G7+ country.
As Korea resumes its full-fledged diplomacy, the new president took the first step at the G7 summit, having unveiled Korea's visions for energy and AI. Now, many are watching whether more summit diplomacy would follow at the upcoming NATO summit next week. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Calgary.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy was also in Canada, but his trip ended up not being so fruitful, with no Trump meeting or a joint statement on the Ukraine war by the G7 members. Lee Seung-ja has more.
During the G7 summit in Canada, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy on Tuesday called on member nations to invest in Ukraine's defense technologies. The comments were made at the special G7 leaders meeting for Ukraine, where Zelenskyy shared details of Russia's missile and drone strikes targeting civilians in his country. The Ukrainian leader said Russia's upgrading of Iranian drones and its cooperation with North Korea is the reason Ukraine is actively working on the development of interceptor drones and why the country requires additional funding for their production. Zelenskyy also called for tougher sanctions on Russia, stressing that the EU's 18th sanctions package must reinforce restrictions on Russia's banking and energy sectors. He also called on G7 leaders to impose a strict price cap on Russian oil. During a meeting with Zelenskyy and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney on the same day, the Canadian leader announced that his country will provide Ukraine with a new military package worth more than $2 billion. Carney says the new military aid will give Ukraine drones, helicopters, and ammunition. Canada will also provide Ukraine with a $2.3 billion loan to help it rebuild public infrastructure destroyed by years of Russian bombing. Meanwhile, the Kremlin on Tuesday said U.S. President Donald Trump was right to say that it was wrong to remove Russia from the Group of 8 in 2014. The comments come as Trump said at the G7 summit on Monday that the G8 had been wrong to expel Russia after annexing Crimea from Ukraine. According to Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, despite being expelled from the group, the G7 had lost practical significance for Russia and looked rather useless now. While the G7 summit takes place in Canada, Chinese President Xi Jinping held a summit with the leaders of 5 Central Asian countries on Tuesday. During the summit in Astana, Xi criticized Trump's tariff policy, saying that there are no winners in a tariff war. Xi said China and the 5 Central Asian countries of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan will strengthen its cooperation as Beijing looks to further deepen cooperation on trade, energy, and infrastructure with the resource-rich region. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
So, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung is currently on his way back home after wrapping up his first overseas trip, attending the G7 summit over in Canada. To walk us through the key takeaways from his 3-day visit, we have our presidential office correspondent Song Yoo-jin here in the studio. It's good to see you, Yoo-jin.
Great to be here, Tommy.
So, Yoo-jin, the trip has come to an end, but wasn't there uncertainty at first over whether President Lee would attend the G7 summit at all?
You're right, Tommy. There was definitely a lot of speculation and questions, especially because this particular trip came just 12 days after President Lee took office, marking the fastest overseas debut for any South Korean president. Now, for your comparison, it took President Yoon Suk-yeol, former President Yoon Suk-yeol, 49 days, Moon Jae-in 51 days, and Park Geun-hye 70 days. Now, despite this tight timeline, President Lee did make the decision to attend. So here's what he told reporters aboard the Air Force One.
국제사회에 대한민국이 신속하게 정상화됐다는 것을 좀 보여주는 게 필요하다라는 의견도 있었고, 또 앞으로는 우리가 국제사회가 협력할 분야가 상당히 많은데 좀 무리하더라도 일찍 접촉하는 게 낫겠다는 의견들이 많아서.
As you know, South Korea experienced a period of stalled diplomacy after former President Yoon's martial law debacle back in December.
Right. It was certainly a meaningful debut. Now, Yoo-jin, let's turn to the results. He did deliver remarks at the G7's expanded session, but much attention was on his bilateral meetings. So why don't we start with Tuesday's meeting with Japan?
Right, that was indeed the most anticipated one during President Lee's visit, especially after the planned summit with U.S. President Donald Trump was canceled because, as you know, President Trump decided to return early, citing the situation in the Middle East. However, President Lee did meet with Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba, marking their very first summit.
우리나라에서는 일본과 한국과의 관계를 가깝고도 먼 나라라고 경칭합니다. 마치 안마당을 같이 쓰는 이웃집처럼 우리는 뗄래야 뗄 수 없는 것. 오늘을 계기로 한국과 일본이 미래지향적으로 좀 더 나은 관계로 발전하기를 진심으로 기대합니다.
I truly hope that marking the 60th anniversary of normalized diplomatic ties, exchanges will grow not just between our two governments and businesses, but also between our people. I look forward to Korea and Japan working together in a way that contributes more to the region and to the world.
So during this 30-minute meeting, the leaders reaffirmed their commitment to regular summit-level meetings while also agreeing to strengthening trilateral coordination with the United States, particularly in responding to regional geopolitical challenges, including North Korea. A senior presidential office official told reporters the talks were held in a positive, friendly atmosphere, and both leaders expressed interest in frequent reciprocal visits.
Now, aside from Japan, with Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba on Tuesday, President Lee also made sure to sit down with other world leaders, right?
Right. So on Tuesday alone, President Lee held bilateral meetings with 6 other heads of state, plus UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Now, among the G7 members, he met with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney.
The leaders of South Korea and the UK agreed to move forward on updating their post-Brexit FTA. They also discussed working together on Korean Peninsula, peace and security.
And in his summit with Canadian Prime Minister Carney, Lee emphasized defense cooperation, specifically mentioning the participation of Korean companies in Canada's submarine acquisition program, with contracts expected to be finalized by 2028. President Lee also held summits with the leaders of Brazil, Mexico, India, and the European Union, where economic cooperation was high on the agenda.
But Eugene, President Lee Jae-myung's summit diplomacy actually began on Monday on the first day of the three-day visit, right?
Right. So President Lee actually kicked off his visit to Canada by holding a bilateral meeting with two world leaders. First, the President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, which also focused on economic and security cooperation. Now, throughout his bilateral meetings with a total of 9 heads of state, the presidential office says that President Lee prioritized building personal rapport and also pragmatic diplomacy.
President Lee engaged comfortably with all the leaders, drawing on his prior knowledge of their personal backgrounds, political careers, and governing philosophies, while also using his trademark humor to build rapport.
In virtually every bilateral meeting, there were focused discussions on advancing practical cooperation in areas like trade, investment, supply chains, and energy, aimed at delivering real benefits for the Korean economy and businesses.
Well, it certainly does seem like a strong start, but there's still a pending task left, a meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump. Eugene, any updates on when that could happen?
Well, that is, as of now, the big question, because a lot of people put focus on whether President Lee would meet President Donald Trump, because the looming deadline for the 25% reciprocal tariffs by the Trump administration on South Korea is approaching fast. However, the talks apparently, as you know, did not realize. So according to a senior top office official, talks are currently ongoing to arrange a meeting at another multilateral engagement. One possibility is next week's NATO summit, but President Lee's attendance hasn't been confirmed yet.
Well, Eugene, we're going to have to get back to you once that happens in the near future. Thank you so much for coming in today.
My pleasure.
The Middle East conflict intensifies as Israel and Iran exchange strikes on the 6th consecutive day. Our Yoon-hee has the latest.
A new wave of strikes has shaken cities in both Israel and Iran as the conflict between the two countries enters its 6th day. U.S. President Donald Trump on Tuesday called for Iran's unconditional surrender, declaring that the U.S. now holds complete and total control of the skies over Iran. He also said that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is an easy target and that America's patience is wearing thin. Not backing down, Iran's supreme leader posted on social media early Wednesday, declaring to Israel that the battle begins. Following his warning to Iran, the U.S. president held a National Security Council meeting in Washington after abruptly leaving the G7 summit a day early on Monday. The White House has yet to provide an official statement following the 80-minute meeting, but CNN reports that officials familiar with the discussions say Trump is weighing options and growing more open to using U.S. military assets to strike Iranian nuclear facilities, and that he spoke by phone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Amid the possibility of change in Trump's approach, sources say he is still open to a diplomatic solution if Iran is willing to make concessions. According to Reuters, meanwhile, fighter aircraft have been deployed to the Middle East already, although U.S. military officials have emphasized their defensive nature. So far, Washington's involvement in the conflict has remained defensive, supporting Israel by helping intercept Iranian missile attacks. The pressing question is whether the United States will intervene in the Israel-Iran conflict with military support or push for a diplomatic resolution as civilians flee and the death toll continues to rise. According to Iranian state media, more than 220 people have been killed since Israel began bombing Iran on Friday. Iranian attacks on Israel have resulted in at least 24 deaths. Yoon-hee, Arirang News.
North Korea is dispatching at least 6,000 military personnel to Russia so that they can help rebuild a Russian city damaged by its war with Ukraine. The deployment marks a new phase in Pyongyang's deepening partnership with Moscow, and it's drawing concerns from Seoul. Our Kim Jong-sil reports.
North Korea is sending thousands of military construction workers to Russia's Kursk region, including 5,000 construction workers to rebuild damaged infrastructure and 1,000 sappers to clear the area of landmines. The decision was announced by Russia's top security official Sergei Shoigu after he met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang on Tuesday afternoon, their second meeting in just 2 weeks.
It's a gesture of brotherly support from the North Korean people and their leader, Kim Jong-un.
North Korea is believed to have already sent some 12,000 combat troops to Russia's Kursk region since October. South Korean intelligence says around 600 have been killed, with total casualties nearing 4,700. Analysts say Pyongyang's support isn't without strings, and it's likely expecting a payoff.
North Korea will likely get advanced systems like the Pantsir air defense weapon and reconnaissance satellite technology.
Professor Kim added that Pyongyang will also likely receive oil and food supplies in return, crucial support as it struggles under sanctions and isolation. Other analysts say the visit also reflects shared concerns over Washington's recent signals regarding the situation in the Middle East.
With Trump doubling down on saying Iran must never get nuclear weapons, Russia may be reassuring North Korea, which has taken real risks for Moscow and still wants full recognition as a nuclear power.
Pyongyang gave no details on the new deployment, but said the two sides exchanged views on global and regional issues and reached full consensus. A South Korean presidential office official on Wednesday called the deployment concerning and said Seoul does not support it. Earlier, the foreign ministry said the employment of North Korean workers abroad violates UN Security Council resolutions and called on Pyongyang and Moscow to halt their cooperation. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
For the first time under the Yi administration, South Korea, the U.S. and Japan held combined air drills on Wednesday morning in waters off the southern part of Jeju Island. This also marked the first joint air drill since January. 2 South Korea's F-15K fighter jets, 6 U.S. F-16s, and 2 Japanese F-2s participated. The drills were conducted to boost trilateral security cooperation to deter North Korea's advancing nuclear missile threats, the Air Force said, and added that it plans to continue three-way drills on the back of a firm Seoul-Washington alliance. The government and the ruling Democratic Party have finalized a coordination on a supplementary budget plan, agreeing to provide cash payments to all citizens while offering additional support to vulnerable groups. Our Moon Ji-young has more.
Expected to exceed 20 trillion won or $14.6 billion, the government and the ruling party have finalized the details of their supplementary budget. This comes after the National Assembly passed the first extra budget of 13.8 trillion won last month, which included about 400 billion won for vouchers to support small merchants. Representative Jin Sung-jun, the DP's chief policymaker, announced the details after a policy meeting with officials from the Democratic Party, the Ministry of Economy and Finance, and the presidential office on Wednesday morning. Jin stated that consumer vouchers for livelihood recovery will go to all citizens, with additional assistance to low-income and vulnerable groups. He also mentioned that the extra budget plan follows the principle of universal relief and reflects President Lee Jae-myung's determination to provide additional support for vulnerable groups.
An expansionary fiscal policy is fundamental in times of crisis. We urge the government to formulate a bolder and more proactive supplementary budget plan.
DP officials stated they would actively adjust the debt of small business owners incurred since COVID-19, announcing that a budget for debt relief has been reflected in the plan. They also decided to issue more local currency to boost consumption within regions. Furthermore, the government decided on a revenue correction, revising the budget based on the forecast of lower tax revenue than expected last year. Upon President Lee's return on Thursday from the G7 meeting, If he holds a cabinet meeting to review and approve the supplementary budget containing these details, the National Assembly will then commence a full-scale review of the plan. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
Cheonggyecheon is one of Seoul's most iconic urban streams that becomes a nice rest area, especially during the hot summertime. But it wasn't this welcoming or comforting 20 years ago. Our Park Kwon-woo tells us more.
With daytime temperatures soaring past 30 degrees Celsius, people in Seoul are doing all they can to stay cool, from carrying sun umbrellas to clutching icy drinks. And for many, it's the perfect weather to enjoy the water or even get right in. And there's a special place that's drawing big crowds, the upper part of Cheonggyecheon, temporarily open to the public to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the stream's restoration. Laughter echoed as children and adults splashed, kicked up water, and even waded through stronger currents for fun. International tourists were also spotted easily, cooling off and snapping photos.
Living in somewhat of a big city, you don't normally get to see really lovely streams like this, especially when it's so hot and humid. Kind of refreshing to be able to step in the water. It was a lot of fun.
But for Seoulites, Cheonggyecheon isn't just for play. It also offers a peaceful escape from the heat.
It's been so hot lately, but by the stream, it feels cool, so it's a great place to rest. I often like coming out here for some fresh air, especially as sitting all day at work feels stuffy.
That comfort is the result of a remarkable transformation that began 2 decades ago.
Cheonggyecheon was once sitting under concrete during Korea's industrial boom. Restoring it raised environmental concerns, but now it's clean enough for native fish and birds to thrive. A true case of urban ecological revival.
In fact, the stream is home to around 20 native fish species, including the Korean spotted barbel, which only survives in grade 2 or cleaner water. And that's thanks to regular water and bacteria tests conducted to maintain quality. Beyond ecosystem revival, the stream is widely recognized as a successful model of urban water management, offering more than just eco-friendly value.
Cheonggyecheon helps lower the surrounding temperatures raised by heat-absorbing pavement like asphalt, and even improves air quality, acting like an air conditioner for the city.
Seoul now plans to transform more than 300 kilometers of streams running through the city into vibrant, accessible waterfront parks just like Cheonggyecheon. And as the city moves toward a more water-sensitive future, Cheonggyecheon stands as a reminder that even in the heart of a big city, nature can make a peaceful comeback. Park Kwon-woo, Arirang News.
The summer heat is getting stronger and stronger all over the country. Today, the daytime temperature in Seoul rose up to 31 degrees Celsius, and it will rise to 32 degrees tomorrow. Please take care not to get any heat-related illnesses under such hot conditions. The rainy season will begin in inland areas in the second half of the week. It will rain in the central parts of the country and Jeollabuk-do province from tomorrow night. Heavy rain is forecast across the country on Friday. Up to 80 millimeters of rain is expected in northern parts of Gyeonggi-do province and northern parts of Gangwon-do province, and 10 to 60 millimeters in other regions. Tomorrow morning, Seoul and Jeju will start off at 22 degrees, Chuncheon at 18 degrees. Highs will move up to 32 degrees in Seoul and Daejeon, 34 degrees in Gyeongju. Rain in the central parts of the country will continue until the weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami, and for all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.